Hi, everybody. My name is Chris Greco. I'm your host for the Data Show. My co-host is Ralph Greco. We're going to bring him in a second, and we'll talk about the different aspects, the format of the show, how it works, what we're going to talk about today, the different aspects. Just to let you know, basically, this is, and I think it's pretty important to understand that we don't have Ralph nor I, and Ralph Greco. Hi, that's my co-host. The We don't have an opinion one way or another on these type topics. So we're going to cover a topic today that's can be controversial, and we've covered controversial topics in the past. Now, understand that we try not to have an opinion on either side of this. All we're doing is looking at the data, and we're making an evaluation of the data based on what's going on and the idea behind the media reporting of this data. So that's basically what's going to happen with that today. So this is what we're going to talk about today. We're talking about God, belief in God. And recently, media had some reports on this based on a Gallup poll, and we'll talk about media reports, and we'll talk about the Gallup poll. So this is our program agenda. It happens with every single type of program we've had in the past. Basically, is the media accurately reporting? That's what we're concerned about, is making sure that happens. We have 4 questions we're going to ask. Is the sample quantity sufficient? Sample quality sufficient? Statistical test sufficient? Whatever there was. And finally, was the media accurate? So that's basically what we're going to talk about today. Now, let's talk about the idea about headlines. So, by the way, welcome aboard, Ralph. Sorry, just got how that's
you're on a roll, dude. Don't
hosting the deal. So
go, baby. Just go.
That's what. So now let's talk about the headlines. And the headlines, we talked about this off screen for a little bit, and it was actually interesting. So we're going to go ahead and talk about this. So this is the Gallup poll headline, and this was based on the 2022 area. Belief in God in U.S. dips to 81%, a new low. So let's say, how about another one? How about this one, USA Today? Number of U.S. adults who believe in God has dropped 6% since 2017, poll shows. Again, Gallup poll aspects. Then they talk about the different polling. How about this one, Washington Examiner? Public belief in God drops to historic low, poll. So just take a look at all these different headlines and see, exactly what they're saying here. So this one says, hey, it's dipped. This one says, oh, drops 6%. This one's a new low, right? So this is all about, it's dropped, historic low. Oh my God, it's dropped to 81%. Now, and I was telling Ralph this, so I went back and I took a look at a 2016 Gallup article, same thing, Gallup here, and here it is, Gallup 2016, most Americans still believe in God. This was at 89%. So I get it where it dropped 8%, but it's amazing that this one is belief in God in U.S. dips to 81%, a new low. Well, it's a new low because it is the low, right? It's the lowest. It's the lowest it's been, according to Gallup poll. And then you have this one. So that's the headline, and that's what we're gonna talk about today. And since I'm already here, basically the Gallup poll also shows the study. This is what we're talking about in these areas, and they include a nice graph. They include all these different things. So the first question we have is, is the volume of the sample, is the number of the sample good enough to be able to make what they call a representation from a representative? Is the sample representative of the entire population?
Yeah.
So go ahead, Ralph. You were talking about this before.
All right. So I think you have to start at the beginning, which is how did they get the data and how do they find the folks? So this is Gallup, right? And Gallup will go and they have roughly got 1,000 people. In fact, the number I think is 1,007, right? We won't get caught up in the number. It kind of shows it to us. From May 2nd to May 22nd, so over a 20-day period, they have it right down here, a random, in quote, now, this is a classic, it's a random sample of 1,000 adults. Yeah, the random people that picked up the phone and answered them. So that's kind of a funny thing, right? So they could have called 50,000 people and only 1,000 people picked up the phone and answered their questions. These are people living in the 50 United States, right? And even DC, which is kind of interesting. 75% cell phones, 25% landlines. We can talk about that all the time we want. And they had to figure out a way as they're making these calls to build this 1,000 people to kind of look like our country. So roughly an age segmentation they wanted, roughly how many blacks, how many whites, how many Hispanics, how many Hispanic non-whites, right? Whatever measures they had, they wanted to make sure that of those 1,000, those groups were represented inside. So this is funny because we'll talk two things here in a minute. Number one is, does 1,000 people represent 300 million people? That is the United States. And if it's 18 or older, let's pretend it's 200 million. So we'll just use a number. So 1,000 people are going to represent 200 million people in the United States. And Chris will talk to you a little bit about this, but there are ways to look at sample sizes as we're doing statistics and understand, can we represent a much larger population with a particular sample? And the simple answer to that question is, yeah, 1,000 people, in a sense, we could ramp that up to say those 1,000 people help us understand what's going on with a much larger population with a certain confidence interval, and you'll see what that is. But one of the things we'll start talking about more is, okay, let's be, so there's statistics, then there's also this one thing you have to think in the back of your head is reason out, is this reasonable? All right, so I'm going to bring up two things, and Chris and I can chat about this. Number one is, if there's 50 states and we had 1,000 people, that means 20 people, persons, whatever, pips per state. Oh, so I'm going to talk to 20 people, and that's going to be the state of Ohio. I'm just going to talk to 20 people around my neighborhood, and that's the state of Pennsylvania. Yeah, no offense, that's BS, right? Statistically, I understand it, but come on. Who answered the phones? What numbers you know? And we have this random number generated on whatever. It's who picked up the phones. We try to marginalize for time of day and whatever. The answer is, if Chris and I got in a car and drove around North Carolina and randomly talked to 20 people, that's a good enough poll for the entire state. You would all think that's not going to make it. But the answer is, again, if we're looking at a large population, we can say, if we talk to 1,000 people, but when I break it out and go state by state, I have a problem with this, right? Number two is, if I have 20 people and one person, right, gives me an incorrect answer or an answer that they make up or whatever, I won't know, but 5% of my sample now is, I have to worry about it. But I can't, if they say to me, and you'll see in here, they talked about, they ask them their age, they don't confirm it. They ask them their age. They ask the stuff about them. They ask them, are you a Democrat or Republican? Oh yeah, sure, I'm a Democrat. How am I supposed to validate that? Do I go to voting records, look your name up and go back, right? And validate a lot of these things. So when you start to get to these smaller samples, that changes in just a smaller number can really skew these things up and down. And so if you think about what they're trying to do, if we want to make it look like our country, and I said, oh yeah, well, it's 6% Asian, that means I'm going to talk to all of the 1,000 people, 60 Asians in the entire United States, spread across 50 states, one per state, and that person is going to represent the entire segment for everybody else, right? So again, we'll talk to you a little bit about statistically. Yeah, this might work, but you have to think in the back of your head: is this what I want to use for a poll? Is this really what's going to drive my answers? And I'm going to, everybody's going to write entire articles off this. So, I mean, Chris, I didn't mean to take over some of this, but if you want to talk a little bit just about the power of the sample size, right, and what right. People would think about it, right?
So here's what. When you and I both teach statistics, whenever we teach statistics, we talk
better
about
than me, by the way. So let's just be clear on that. So.
What's that?
You better than me. I'm okay.
Thanks. Thank you. But basically, it goes something like this. Whenever we talk about sampling in our classes, we talk about that the sampling should be random, right? That's so important. And random sampling, a lot of people don't understand. They go, well, just take every sixth person. That's not random. Take every person within a certain. Nope, that's not random. You have to have a random sampling. And it's funny because people sit there and they go, well, I don't know if I believe in random sampling. And my retort also always is, if you don't believe in random sampling, the next time you go in to have a blood test, have them take it all. So, I mean, the random sampling that they do in a blood test is the same type of random sampling you want to do whenever you do a survey. No matter where they poke you to get that needle in there to get a sample of blood is going to be a random sample, because your blood goes through your entire system. Every single cell of blood goes through your entire system. So no matter where they poke you, arm, leg, ear, whatever it is, you're going to get the same result that you're going to get anywhere anywhere, from the arm. So
Right.
that's why everybody sits back and goes, well, how do I know that's really a random sample? Well, it is, because the blood flows all the way through your body. That's the same way we want to do random sampling when it comes to statistics. And unfortunately for this, I mean, it was before we got on the air. I showed Ralph. I said, "Hey, look, Ralph, I know the statistical tool for this. I got the power.
Yep.
Literally, I mean, it's called statistical power, and it says according to the statistical power, 1,007 is fine." And his retort was, "Chris, listen to what you're saying. The statistical calculations are fine, but you're talking about 0.00005, of whatever
Right.
of 200 million people, if we're talking about that." And
Right.
and I sit back and I go, I know, Ralph, but dadgummit, the statistical calculations. So it goes back to a common sense approach that 1,007 is just not going to hack it. Now,
Yeah.
it's interesting also when you talk about. Now we'll go right into variety here. So the sample volume, according to statistical calculations, is fine. According to common sense, it doesn't make it right. You want
No.
to have enough people to be able to make a good study. 1,007. Possibly
Again,
not the right
just
one.
think to yourself, 20 people in your state
I know you're
represents the entire
right.
state.
And you sit back,
So,
now
right.
if you say 20 blood cells in your body, that makes sense because blood cells go through everything,
Right.
right? But not everybody goes through all 50 states to get to where they're going.
Right. And
You know,
so the one thing we should talk about at some point, and we can, is we got to remind folks what ecological fallacy is. And so we can talk about that when we get there, but
right.
sample variety is a good conversation to have. So remember, these are people either answering their cell phones or answering a landline. And so think to yourself as an individual, how many random calls that say spam risk do I pick up on a
Right.
daily basis? Probably none. If it's a number I don't know and they're trying to sell me an extended warranty, whatever it is, right? A lot of us have gotten to the point where we don't answer phones that much. So who are the people answering their landlines and or their cell phones? And it may say Gallup poll or whatever. It doesn't matter. A lot of people won't do it. So they're not getting paid. So this was free, right? I checked. I thought they're not getting paid for this.
Right. No, Gallup
Right.
polls just,
Right. And by the way, we're talking about 20 people in Hawaii, right? And 20 people in wherever, right? And so what we're not telling you is which state has the greatest interest, right? And belief in God. We're amalgamating all these groups together because that's just what it's going to be, right? So we have this going on as well too. So sample variety is, again, they try to get it so that we have approximately the same percentage of men and women, black, white, right? And so good for them, right? That's really hard to do because at some point they're sitting around like, we just need one more guy, right? And they're like dialing for dollars to get one more man or whatever it is. I need somebody 65 and older. And so that's what you do sometimes if you want to get this. But you have to remember, if we're saying, again, let's pick something. So I want the right percentage of Asian men in this country. 6% Asian, so I need 30 out of 1,000. And that means not every state's going to have somebody because there's only 30 and there's 50 states. So now I'm not getting everybody in different locations, right? I also might be getting an Asian man in Pennsylvania when a large population of Asians live in California, right? So I'm not even getting maybe the right perspective. So I give them creds for trying to do the variety. And I get what they're going for. I'm still fine. That's fine. They did that. So that, like that's a check for them. But the question is it still, could they have gotten another 1,000 people?
well, and it goes back to basically technology. So they say here, landline and cellular telephone numbers are selected using random digit dial methods, which is great. and to get the basics here, you sit back and you say, okay, fine. We're going to do that. Now, in the old days, when everything was area coded and everyone at the address had a black phone, it worked fine.
Yes.
But the problem is you could have five. You could have 5 different people living in the same household, each having a cell phone, each having a different area code or number. That random, I'm not saying that the random thing's going to hit all 5 of them, but the probability is that somewhere along the line, maybe something would happen and you'd get 2 or 3 people within the same household answering the same questions. Well, the environment says that they're either going to, maybe the kids are rebellious. They want to be, the parents or the parents do believe in God. They don't want to believe in God. So they're going to, they're going to,
well,
so the environment
the one thing that's funny here is if they call on a landline and there's 2 people and they're both in the group they wanted to talk to, who has the closest birthday?
That's right.
today.
Right.
You're like, seriously. So
Right.
you're telling me the one guy isn't going to yell into the phone or yell to the person what answers to give, right? I mean, it's just kind of funny, and I get why they were doing it, but stop, right?
Well,
And
and also,
so, right,
and then liberal conservative, right? So they say, oh, in fact, in the report they talk about liberal conservative aspects and what they did and all the. I mean, they have an absolutely unbelievably great way of presenting that. I mean, there it is, right? Here's President of. I mean, they have America's belief in God. Says which comes closest to your view about God. God hears your prayers. God hears your prayers and can intervene, whatever it is. So they ask the questions. Now, the problem is also, we talk about variety, is in reading this report, they changed some of the questions since
yes,
1944. When you
yes,
change questions, when you're not consistent with your questions, you're not going to get consistency with the answers. And people are saying, well, the things they asked in 1944, because it says first asked this question in 1944, repeating it again in 47, twice each in 50s and 60s, blah, 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 And the thing is, says in those latter 4 surveys, a consistent 98% said they believe in God, because the question was, do you believe in God? Yes or no? I mean,
yeah.
so it was no. Now it's like any supreme being, any supreme aspect. So now
Well,
we're
in fact,
talking
that
about
first
this.
question, Chris, was, do you believe in a God? So when they first started the survey, the question was, do you believe in a God? Not do you believe in God?
Right.
So in 1947, right? And you have to remember what we were going through in 1947, the beginning of the Cold War, the Russians, everything else,
Right.
right? We're changing our Pledge of Allegiance, everything, right? Do you believe in a God? And so it's just really funny how, so you're right. So now you're trying to compare, and it's not apples and oranges, but it's like a Macintosh apple to a John Gold to some, right? They're all apples, but they've been slightly modified or they're slightly different. And so does that make the survey bad? But it just, again, the other thing is it's not the same 1,000 people. So we asked 1,000 people, and then a couple of years later, we asked a different 1,000 people. And then we're going to ask a different, the people who asked in 1947, they're probably dead, right? So, or some of them are, and no offense to those people that
Sure.
are, sorry.
Well, I mean, if they're
But
18 and older, and 47,
yeah, yeah,
guess
they're not
what?
around. Right,
Yeah, I
yeah.
mean, you're probably correct. That would make them 100 and some years old. I doubt very much. They probably, yeah,
Yeah,
they probably have.
so yeah, but I mean, the point would be to everybody
Yes,
is you have to understand, and this we could take an entire thing on polling if we wanted to, right? Just
that's right.
sample polling, right? And so because you're gonna with the elections coming up in this year, we could have long conversations about polls. But part of what happens here is we're asking a different 1,000 people, right? So we're dialing for dollars year after year, hoping people will pick up the phone. We can ask the questions, and Gallup's really good at this, right? This is what they do for a living, right? Is their polling, but it's still you have to think about it. If we had even a football stadium, let's take Ohio State Stadium or whatever, you put 120,000 people, you could ask 50 people in there what they thought of the game, and then we randomly ask a different 50 people, and they were sitting on the other side or somewhere else or whatever, and they hated the game. And so you just by the sheer luck of the 50 people that you got to answer your questions, you get this opinion. So the one thing, and again, not to hammer on this, and Chris, you can go into any detail you want, right? But to simply define, there's a phrase you're going to hear a lot, and I talk about with my students a lot, and other folks do too, which is ecological fallacy, which is taking what you know about one person and applying it to the population, or taking what you know about the population and applying it to that one person. So any kind of polling is taking what we learn from these people, and we hope we get enough of them that we can apply it to the population, but there still could be that problem. Again, if we randomly pick 20 people in the state of North Carolina and said, tell us everything you want to know about God, we may have just picked the wrong 20 people. But we're going to go, okay, we're good. We got North Carolina. We'll go run to another
Moving on.
state and ask those 20 people. We're done. We have enough. Well, according to statistics, well, come on. Right?
This is all, and it's all self-reporting. It's all, they're talking about conservative, liberal, Republican, Democrat, independent. People are they're not going to always tell the truth.
No.
So they're going to self-report. And I mean, you brought up the one point where you were like, you took a survey and it was like, I'm just going to mess with these people. And you started answering the questions just to see how that would affect the survey, which to tell the truth is kind of neat. It's kind of like, making your heart pump harder during a cardiac catheterization, less dangerous, of course, but still you want to see if the test is really accurate or not.
Yeah.
So the bottom line is that this is this is what we talk about when we talk about statistical aspects. Now, the next question probably going to be pretty easy, and that's going to be statistical tests, right? What were the statistical tests they did? They added the stuff up. I mean, they just figured out percentages is what they did. So there were no real hard, complex statistical tests they did. Now, they did do a 95% confidence level based on margin of error, which was good. Now, in the margin of error, to just make people understand, when they say a margin of error is plus or minus 4%, that means when they say there's 81%, that means that there's a 95% probability that 81% is between 77% and 85%, which means now all of a sudden you could be talking about 77%, which would be a new low, or 85%, which would be about the same. You'd be within a couple of percentage points of the last test.
Well, and here's the funny thing is, so if we ran this thing 1,000 times, right, we know that with 950 times out of 1,000, it would be between these two numbers. So imagine that last time they did it, there was this plus or minus. And this time we did it, there's this plus or I don't know what the hell I'm doing here, but you get my point.
Right.
So all of a sudden, it could be like this. And so we'd have to pull out every one they did and lay out the dots with our confidence intervals around it. And then we'd be like, okay, look, no offense, this hasn't really changed over the last 5 times we've done it, because the first time it was 98 plus, and by the way, I can't wait to see what they had at 98, because it's plus and minus 2, I think, right? Maybe, who knows? But it could be higher, right? So the answer is, all of a sudden, what was 98 could be 95. What was 96?
Oh, yeah. 95. That's hilarious what you just said. Because if in 1944 they determined it was 98% with a plus or minus of 4 percentage points, 98 and 4 is 102. You can't have 102. So all of a sudden it's like, so it's not really 4%. It's like 2 on the right, 4 on the left. Is that so? Of course, that doesn't work that way. But I mean, it's the idea that when people talk about 95% confidence intervals, a lot of people say, "Wow, there's a 95% accuracy." No, it just means you've just increased the curve. Now instead of this, you got this. So instead of hitting the side of the barn, you can hit the side of the hill, and you're good. So it's a whole different situation. And when you try to explain that in statistics, a lot of people think 95 means more accuracy, but actually 95 just means more of the curve. So it's a situation where but that's the statistical test. They just did proportions, which is fine, and they include all of those in the report, which is again fine. But like you said, how do they determine that you have the right number of males, right number of females, the right number? And it's interesting because this was done. I didn't see anything having to do with. Now they talk. I think they talk about race in here a little bit, or ethnicity, but. They don't. So they talk about gender, race, ethnicity, which is non-Hispanic white people and people of color. That's it. Correct. Then the age, 18 to 29, 30 to 49, which is interesting because 18 to 29 is 11 years. 30 to 49 is 19 years. 50 to 64 is 14 years, and then 65 and above. So even the age ranges are not consistent. Now, that may be because maybe there was something there about, baby boomers versus Gen Xers, where, maybe they're trying to do it so that they would include all those different generations, right? So I'm not sure because I don't have access to the entire thing. If you want access to it, you can call them, but they charge a pretty good.
It's Gallup.
Gallup.
Yeah, so they're gonna, if you wanted to do it, you could, but the answer would be okay. So one other thing you have to think about is, when you do your sample size, one last thing, right? So they in their mind said, we know we have a population of a couple hundred million people. Let's even do the entire United States, which is 300 million people. Look, if I want to get 95% confidence, I know I'm going to have plus or minus, whatever, and have an error. And part of what happens is we have to assume a percentage of the population has this thing we're trying to look for as well, right? So we're going to ask them about religion, whether they do or don't, which, then you can assume 100% do, right? So 1,000 is pretty good, right? And here's the deal. If you want to go from that 95% to like 99.9, you go from like 1,000 to 1,600. So the question would be is it cost you a lot to get the 1,000, or are you willing to go for another 600 people and really get now a much more a higher confidence interval. And so that would be an interesting question. And again, you and I don't have to do this, so we don't have to sit on the phone and be rejected. Hey, can I ask you a question? Do you believe in God? Could you do that? Hi, I'm with Gallup. I need to ask you a question. And go ahead. Wait, honey, or what are we watching? Okay, Matlock doesn't start for 5 minutes, right? Okay, and then I'm going to answer your question. No offense to the old people like Matlock. Yeah, I love
That's right.
So,
well, if somebody calls me up and says they want to ask me more than a question on a survey, it's kind of like done.
So for everybody watching this, think about and there's some people like, I love these things, I do it. Or are you the person that's like, oh, what's the survey about? Oh God, yeah, sure, bring it on. Like, this is Greco. He'd be like, yeah, okay. Oh, do I? No, I stopped doing that 20 years ago. No,
1944.
I'd be the guy just
yeah,
screwing with it, right? And
so
the thing is, and I understand it, right? What would be better is, do you want to open up an internet poll, but then people can cheat and redo it 10 times, right? So, but imagine your life is trying to talk to folks, and it'd be fun to talk to the Gallup people, because how do they bring this conversation up? Which is, hey, I work for Gallup. I'd love to ask you a couple questions. Do you have time? Yeah. Okay. Our questions are about God. Do you want to still take the poll or not? No, I'm good. All right. Then you have to go to the next person.
Yep.
And so I think it'd be interesting to see how many people they really talk to.
That's right.
Before they got to the 1,000.
Or that, yeah, exactly.
They throw stuff away because they're like, well, we already have 50 Asian men or whatever. We don't need it. Boom. Okay. And why did you kick it out? Right. And so there's nothing wrong with that. As data scientists, you constantly have to decide what's in your sample, what isn't. But one of the things we always talk about in the show is there's bias, right? So Chris has a bias, I have a bias, 10 other people we'd work with all have biases. And then people are like, I don't like that. That one's going out. That one doesn't look right. It wasn't completely filled out. It was too late at night or whatever, right? And I know they're trying to take into account times and everything else. But as a scientist, a data scientist, somebody has to determine what stays, what goes. And they probably have some pretty strict rules, and they're never going to tell us. But understand, somebody may have had to make a decision, and you're like, well, maybe they threw away 10. We only had 1,000, right? So all of a sudden you're throwing away 10. You're like, well, okay, now you said it that way, Greco. Yeah, the answer is, what if they threw away 20? What if they threw away 50? And right, they're not just going to go, oh, we got 1,007. Let's just stop. The answer is, we're going to keep going. Right? We're going to keep making calls. We know what the number one in our head, but the answer is, if we got 1,300, well, we would use them all. So part of it is they also went, and it took them from the May 2nd to the 22nd to get 1,000 people to respond and give them feedback. So imagine how many calls, because they're trying to get people after work or whatever. They're not going to call at 2 a.m, and they're not going to call right too early, too late, because that would, people would explode, right? So they have this really short window in the evening time. So that's, so I'm looking at that, that's roughly 3 weeks, right? So it took 20 days. I get 50 people a day, roughly. And I'm getting them all in that 4 to 5 hour period too. So, okay, what was going on May 3rd, May 4th, May 5th, May 6th? What was going on? Maybe why people were picking up the phone or not? Were they unhappy? Was it a gorgeous day out? And so, right, was it Sunday? And they went to church, right? So it doesn't even say how many people, because that would be a question. Oh, do you believe in God? Yeah, did you go to church today? Oh, yeah, well, it was Sunday, right? That would have been a great follow-on question. Not one of those they asked. So anyhow, stuff to think about. And then we get to this last point. Chris is.
Is the media accurate? I mean, well, technically speaking, there's not one headline that is inaccurate.
Correct.
It says, hey, it's a historic low. It is. It's the low, right? Yeah, number of U.S. adults who believe in God has dropped 6% since 2017. Okay.
Right.
I would like to see what 2017 shows, but but that's fine. It works. Belief in God is dips to 81% in a new low. Yes. Taking into consideration that, again, we have we have all these different aspects like the margin of error and that type of thing to consider. So is the media accurate? Yeah, I would say that, they if you parrot the actual study, there's really, you really can't go wrong. It's the area of, the semantics.
But so the deal is, if you're CNN or whoever it is, right, you didn't do the poll. Your Gallup, it has the name Gallup, did the poll. So it's a poll. Reputation. It was done. It was, and statistically correct, right? But nobody said to themselves, hey, we asked 50 people in your state, and this is what they said about God, right? They're not going to say it that way. Instead, a new poll says this. And so I'm with you in that it was accurate. It was there's nothing that they didn't like try to extrapolate, right? They were hitting at like young liberals, like God the least. Well, guess what? Statistically, that's what the answer was, right? There was no regression. It was just, we asked 1,000 people. We know how many were Democrats, how many are liberals, or how many are young. This is the answer they gave us. Now, let's think about that. So if we take 1,000 people, just real quick, we take 1,000 people, split them in half, 50-50. We'll do 40-40-20. We'll have 20 independents, right? So we got 400 people. Oh, but we only need the young people. Well, now the 400, we're down to, right, 200. Oh, okay. And now all I need is like 5 or 6 people in that group to give me an answer different than the last time, and my number drops a large percentage. So you have to watch, because there's 2 parts to any fraction is the numerator denominator, and I could change this part and it's going to look stupid, right? And so we have to watch, because they can make some claims, but again, it's really small numbers. And if 3 people gave a trivial answer kind of stuff, all of a sudden the percentage drops a bunch. And you're like, okay, folks, we're down 2 points. Yeah, because 4 people made up some crap this time, right? So that's the only thing I worry about, is when you get to those small numbers, it doesn't take a lot to tweak them, right? So
that's right. Yeah. Well, we're out of time. So, I mean, this is, and the thing is, something like this, especially when you talk about these types of polling and surveys and those types of areas, always present concerns for us as data analysts, because it's kind of like, where are we getting this data? It's, it's self-reported. And a lot of the data that you get as data analysts are going to be self-reported. So you have to take into consideration that, and take that with, I told Ralph, a bag of salt. You just got to sit there and say, okay, this is what it is. We have to sit back and say, where did this come from? Make your decision about, the belief accuracy and whatever else based on the study. And, this is what we're trying to do. Gets you to read the study. Right. The email you see there is our email. It's C&R, Chris and Ralph, at statisticssleuth.com.
Hey,
so if you have a question,
how should you go first? Shouldn't it be R and C?
Well, it wouldn't. This is like candor, but
if it'd be
Rand-C, and is like, nah, it didn't work. Okay, so of course, it was all about the nothing. Yeah, you're definitely not number 2 in my book. So anyways, and we'll leave it with that. But thank you, Ralph. I'm going to let you go and let you get back to actually doing stuff that makes a difference, like teaching and doing stuff like that. Okay. Love you. See ya. Hi, everybody. Okay. So that's it for today. Thank you so much for tuning in, and hopefully this sets you with some tools, some ready-made tools, or at least evaluation aspects to be able to do some good, solid evaluation of media reported data. And in the meantime, stay safe. And definitely have a great day, and have also remember, a headline does not mean that everything, the content or whatever else, is what you should do or what you should believe. Decide for yourself.